Welcome to the deep dive. You're here because, well, you want to get a handle on complex ideas without getting lost in the weeds, right? You want to walk away feeling informed, like you've really got the core knowledge locked down.
Makes sense.
Today, we're taking on a big one. Friedrich Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. It's a book that's shaped a lot of thinking, and we're going to try and give you a clear path through it.
That's right. Thus Spoke Zarathustra, published back in the 1880s. It's a really unique piece of work.
Yeah.
Its subtitle, A Book for All and None, kind of hints at its ambition, and its complexity. It's definitely not a straightforward philosophical argument.
Exactly. And to help us make sense of it, we've got this source, Zarathustra's Philosophical Impact Analyzed. This source really drills down into the key ideas of the book and sort of the intellectual world Nietzsche was part of without getting bogged down in his personal life.
Right, focusing on the text itself.
So our goal today is basically to pull out the core philosophical concepts of Zarathustra and understand why they're still being talked about.
Our mission really is to give you those essential insights.
Okay, so the big picture that kind of emerges from our source, it's that Zarathustra is grappling with a fundamental challenge of the modern world. Nihilism.
Right, that feeling that maybe nothing ultimately has meaning.
Exactly. And Nietzsche offers a set of interconnected ideas as like a response to this. Let's start with one of the most famous ones, the Übermensch.
Ah, yes, the Übermensch, often translated as Overman or sometimes Superman.
Yeah, and Zarathustra declares this the meaning of the earth, doesn't he? The goal for humanity.
He does. And it's crucial to understand what Nietzsche really envisions here. He uses this powerful image.
The rope.
Yeah. Man is a rope tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss. It suggests humanity is in this transitional phase.
So capable of evolving beyond our current limitations.
Precisely. Moving beyond.
Now, when you hear Superman, you might think, comic book hero, flying around.
Of course, that's the immediate association.
But our source is really clear. This isn't about superpowers or physical dominance at all.
No, not in the slightest. It's a philosophical and spiritual transformation. It's about what Nietzsche called self-overcoming, Selbstüberwindung.
Self-overcoming. And self-creation too, right?
Exactly. Think about it as actively shaping who you become. Setting your own standards rather than just relying on, say, traditional authorities like religion.
It's about becoming what one is, as Nietzsche put it.
Yes. It's that deep inner work,
Yeah.
Forging your own values and actually living by them.
And who's the opposite of this Übermensch? The report mentions the last man.
The last man. Found in the marketplace.
Someone just content with mediocrity. Just wanting an easy, comfortable life. Maybe you've encountered this in yourself or others. That temptation to just coast.
Oh, absolutely. It's a familiar pole for many, perhaps. But Nietzsche contrasts this with the attributes of the Übermensch. Things like self-determination, creativity.
That constant drive for self-overcoming we mentioned.
Right, that. Self-mastery, being adaptable, resilient, having courage, and really affirming your instincts while thinking for yourself, not just following the herd.
Okay, here's where it's really vital, I think, to address a damaging misinterpretation.
Damn right.
The term Übermensch got twisted, didn't it, by Nazi ideology into this idea of a biological master race.
Horribly twisted. And our source is emphatic.
Yeah.
This is completely fundamentally wrong. Nietzsche was anti-nationalist. He was anti-Semitic.
It was his sister, wasn't it, who played a role in distorting his ideas after his breakdown?
Unfortunately, yes. She did manipulate his work. So the Übermensch is absolutely not a blueprint for some political ideology or racial superiority.
It's an ideal, then.
Yeah.
A potentiality within each individual for profound self-creation, overcoming limitations.
Exactly that. It's about potential.
Okay, so the Übermensch is what the goal, maybe. What's the how? What drives this process of self-overcoming? That would be the will to power, right?
Yes, the will to power. Willsmacht.
And again, this isn't just about, wanting to be in charge politically.
Precisely. That's another common misunderstanding. Nietzsche saw it as a fundamental driving force in all living things, not just a desire for political control.
There's that quote.
Right. Zarathustra says, "Where I found the living, there I found the will to power. And even in the will of those who serve, I found the will to be master."
Only where there is life is there also will. Not will to life, but thus I teach you, will to power.
Exactly. So it's this intrinsic drive towards growth, expansion, overcoming resistance, the discharge of strength. It's the very dynamic of existence itself.
So it's that inherent push to grow, to expand your capabilities, to overcome obstacles, that feeling you get when you're striving for something, even just personal growth.
You got it. It's the energy of life itself, but directed towards increasing power in a very broad sense.
And you can see how this links back to the Übermensch.
Absolutely. It's the will to power expressed in a refined way, you could say, channeled towards self-mastery, creativity.
And it's what fuels creating new values after the erosion of the old ones, the death of God.
Yes, and interestingly, Nietzsche even suggests that the act of interpreting the world, just making sense of things, is itself an exercise of the will to power.
The report mentions that scholars debate its scope, though. Like, is it a universal principle or more psychological?
That's an important point, yeah. There's definitely debate. Some see it as a fundamental aspect of reality, a cosmological doctrine even. Others view it more as a psychological hypothesis or an interpretive lens.
There are nuances, too, right?
Yeah.
Between craft, force, and mock power.
Yes, those distinctions matter in detailed analysis. But for our purposes today, the key takeaway from the source is that in Zarathustra, the will to power is presented as the core energy behind that self-overcoming and a deep, deep affirmation of life.
All right, next concept. Maybe the most mind-bending one. Eternal recurrence.
Ewige Wiederkunft. Yeah, definitely mind-bending.
This is the idea that everything that has happened will happen again. Infinitely, exactly the same way.
Exactly the same. It's often called the fundamental conception of Zarathustra. Imagine every joy, every sorrow, every single thought, every action, repeating endlessly.
Wow.
And Zarathustra himself really struggles with this, doesn't he? Calls it the most abysmal thought. Especially the idea that, suffering and even the small man, the mediocre, would recur forever.
I remember that thought experiment from the Gay Science, where a demon whispers this idea to you in your loneliest loneliness.
Yes, section 341. It's powerful.
It really forces you to confront how you feel about your life, doesn't it? Would you be thrilled or just horrified at the prospect of living it all again exactly the same?
Precisely. And that's a key part of its function. Eternal recurrence, in many interpretations, serves as the ultimate test of life affirmation.
Amor fati, the love of fate.
Exactly, amor fati. To truly embrace eternal recurrence means you'd have to say yes to every single moment of your existence, past, present, future, with such intensity that you'd willingly choose to relive it all, over and over.
It's a radical acceptance, then, of everything.
Totally radical.
Our source touches on whether Nietzsche actually meant this literally as a cosmological theory. It sounds, well, pretty out there, scientifically speaking.
Yeah, the report highlights that. While some of Nietzsche's unpublished notes might hint at a literal interpretation, it's never explicitly stated as a scientific fact in his published works. It often appears in dreams, visions.
Right.
So given the scientific implausibility, many scholars see it more as an ethical imperative, maybe a psychological tool. It's a powerful way to evaluate how fully you're living, whether you truly affirm your life in all its aspects, the good and the bad.
So it's less about predicting the future of the cosmos and more about challenging your attitude towards your present life.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's a thought experiment designed to cultivate that profound life affirmation. And maybe the ambiguity itself, is it literal or not, is intentional, fits with his idea of perspectivism maybe, aiming to spark a personal transformation in the reader.
Some scholars even see the whole narrative structure of Zarathustra as embodying this cyclical idea.
That's a fascinating interpretive angle, yeah. Paul Loeb's work, for instance.
Okay, so we have these core concepts: Übermensch, will to power, eternal recurrence. But why were they so important for Nietzsche? This brings us back to the death of God, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And it's not just about a decline in religious belief, is it? It's bigger than that.
You're right. God is dead is such a potent statement, and it goes way beyond mere atheism. For Nietzsche, it signifies the collapse of the entire system of Christian belief and its associated moral and metaphysical framework.
The framework that had basically provided the foundation for Western values for centuries.
Exactly. It's the loss of belief in a fixed objective order, an ultimate source of meaning handed down from on high.
And the consequence of this death, nihilism.
That's the danger. That sense that nothing has inherent value or purpose.
Because the foundation crumbled.
Precisely. Nietzsche defines nihilism as the state where the highest values devalue themselves. It's the loss of that objective meaning, that moral grounding.
He distinguishes between types of nihilism, doesn't he?
He does.
Yeah.
There's passive nihilism, which is sort of resignation, despair, like the last man we talked about, just giving up.
Right.
And then there's active nihilism, which is more deliberate. It's about consciously tearing down the old life-denying values to actually create space for new life-affirming ones.
So Zarathustra, then, is Nietzsche's attempt to navigate this post-God world.
Yeah.
To offer a way beyond nihilism.
That's the core of the project, yes. The Übermensch, will to power, eternal recurrence, they're all part of this attempt to ground meaning in life itself, here on Earth, rather than in some transcendent realm.
And Zarathustra, the character, acts as a guide through this dangerous transition.
Exactly. The report really emphasizes how interconnected these ideas are.
Yeah.
You see the pattern. The death of God leads to the crisis of nihilism. The Übermensch represents a potential overcoming of that nihilism.
Through the active expression of the will to power.
Right. And eternal recurrence serves as the ultimate test, the ultimate affirmation of a life lived fully in accordance with this overcoming. They form a dynamic whole, aimed at a radical revaluation of all values.
But the report does raise an interesting point about potential tensions within this whole framework.
Oh.
Like, how does the ideal of the Übermensch, which seems focused on individual striving and excellence, how does that square with the seemingly universal affirmation required by eternal recurrence, which includes affirming even the small man, the one who doesn't strive?
That's a very sharp question. And it definitely highlights the complexity and the ongoing debates surrounding Nietzsche's work. These potential tensions, these ambiguities, they're part of what makes Zarathustra such a rich and, frankly, endlessly debatable text. It doesn't offer easy, simplistic solutions.
Okay, so we've wrestled with the core philosophical ideas, but Zarathustra is also just such a distinctive piece of literature. The style, the form, they seem just as important as the content itself.
Absolutely crucial. The report stresses this again and again. The literary form isn't just decoration, it's deeply intertwined with the philosophical message.
It reflects his dissatisfaction with traditional philosophy writing, maybe.
I think so. He deliberately chose this unique fusion of philosophy and art. He saw it as philosophy as art, maybe an attempt to be an artistic Socrates, as the source puts it.
It's a real mix of genres, isn't it? You've got these like prophetic speeches.
And personal reflections, poetry, and this narrative arc following Zarathustra's journey.
It's been called philosophical fiction, a philosophical poem. I've even seen comparisons to Greek tragedy or satire.
And this unconventional form serves a vital purpose. Nietzsche likely believed that in a world where traditional authorities were collapsing, just writing dry, academic philosophy wouldn't cut it.
It wouldn't be enough.
Probably not. He needed a way to connect with readers on an emotional and existential level, to provoke a deep shift in perspective, maybe similar to the impact he saw in Greek tragedy.
So it's philosophy as a way of living, not just thinking.
Exactly. Not just an intellectual exercise.
So the way the story unfolds, Zarathustra coming down from the mountains, his encounters with different people, those periods of solitude, all of that actually contributes to the philosophical argument.
Precisely. The narrative structure, Zarathustra's journey, his teachings, his own struggles, it all embodies the philosophical development. It illustrates the process of self-overcoming, the difficulty of communicating radical new ideas.
Even the scholarly debates about the structure, like the role of parts 3 and 4, are part of understanding its function.
Right. Is it a tragedy, a satyr play, a parody? These aren't just literary questions, they have philosophical implications.
And then there's the huge amount of allegory and parable. The tightrope walker, for instance.
A powerful symbol, isn't it? For the precariousness of human existence as we try to overcome our limitations, walking that rope over the abyss.
And the 3 metamorphoses of the spirit, the camel, the lion, the child.
Yes, representing stages in the individual's journey towards spiritual liberation. Bearing burdens, fighting for freedom, and then achieving this innocent creativity, the ability to create new values.
And the various figures Zarathustra meets often seem to embody specific viewpoints Nietzsche wants to examine or critique.
Exactly. They're not just characters, they're symbolic encounters.
And let's not forget the aphoristic style, those short, punchy statements.
Memorable, aren't they?
They really stick with you. And they demand reflection, don't they? Nietzsche himself talked about needing to ruminate on them, like chewing cud.
Yes. The aphorisms are designed to provoke active engagement. You can't just passively receive them. You have to interpret, wrestle with their meaning. It mirrors Zarathustra's own process of discovery.
Our source digs into some of the key recurring symbols. The sun, for example.
The sun. It's not just light, is it? It's abundance. Giving without expecting return, transformation. Even that idea of Untergang, going under, setting, but leading to renewal.
What's striking is how interconnected these symbols feel, the abyss and the tightrope together.
Highlighting that perilous transition after the death of God.
And Zarathustra's cave, it's like an inversion of Plato's cave, isn't it?
Exactly. Not a place of shadows, but a place of wisdom, solitude, where new ideas gestate. His descent from the cave marks his mission to the world.
Even his animal companions, the eagle and the serpent.
Traditionally, pride and wisdom.
They're the first to really grasp eternal recurrence, aren't they? Though he initially dismisses them.
It's fascinating. And the sea, that's another incredibly rich symbol.
Representing depth, the unconscious, suffering maybe, but also transformation, eternity.
Yes, and the potential for birthing new values may be connected to eternal recurrence itself. It's this image of cyclical nature, constant renewal.
Then there's the plant and ghost metaphor.
Illustrating that tension or maybe interplay between our physical, earthly side and our mental, spiritual dimension. Internal conflict.
Even laughter. It starts off as mockery in part 4 with the higher men.
Right, but it evolves, doesn't it? Towards the end, it becomes this symbol of profound affirmation, liberation, kind of joyful wisdom.
It really sounds like Nietzsche's stylistic choices aren't just, window dressing. They are the philosophy, in a way.
I think that's exactly right. The style embodies the content. It's trying to persuade through imagery, narrative, emotion, appealing to our shared pathos, not just logic.
It emphasizes life, the body becoming. It critiques abstraction, philosophy as lived experience.
And the ambiguity, the difficulty, that's part of it too, and forces the reader to interpret, participate actively in creating meaning.
Mirroring Zarathustra's journey, positioning the reader as a co-creator of value.
Exactly. The difficulty isn't a flaw, it might be essential. It reflects the uncertainty of this post-metaphysical era he's describing. It demands a creative response, not just passive acceptance.
So where does Zarathustra fit within Nietzsche's broader career? It came after his more critical middle period works, right? Like Human, All Too Human.
Yes, chronologically, Zarathustra, published between 83 and 85, sits right between that middle period. Human, All Too Human, Daybreak, The Gay Science, and his later, more direct and polemical works like Beyond Good and Evil and Genealogy of Morality.
It feels like a real pivot point.
It really does. The middle period was largely focused on critique, often using that sharp aphoristic style. Zarathustra shifts towards a much more affirmative, visionary stance, but expressed through this incredibly unique literary form, a shift from aphorism to something more prophetic, narrative.
The report highlights a really strong connection with the gay science.
Definitely. The gay science really lays the groundwork. The death of God gets its first major articulation there.
Sections 108, 125.
Right. And eternal recurrence is introduced as that crucial thought experiment in section 341.
And isn't the very end of the 1882 edition of the gay science, doesn't it basically introduce Zarathustra?
Yes. The last section is titled Incipit Traguedia, The Tragedy Begins. And it depicts Zarathustra emerging from his solitude, ready to start his journey. It leads directly into Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So the gay science is like a fulcrum.
So the seeds were planted in the gay science, these big ideas, but Zarathustra gave them this grand, dramatic, embodied expression. The abstract reflections became teachings within a narrative.
That's a good way to see it. And you can even trace echoes back further to the birth of tragedy, themes of tragedy, affirmation, the Apollonian and Dionysian dynamic. They resonate in Zarathustra.
And Zarathustra also looks forward, doesn't it? Laying the foundation for the later works.
Absolutely. The report explains how Beyond Good and Evil and on the Genealogy of Morality pick up and elaborate on many of Zarathustra's core ideas, but in a different style.
More systematic, essayistic.
Exactly. BGE returns to will to power, perspectivism, the critique of morality. Genealogy, which Nietzsche saw as clarifying BGE's aim, digs deep into the origins of moral concepts, good devil, guilt, bad conscience. It develops the master-slave morality idea much more thoroughly than you see it in Zarathustra.
So it's almost like Zarathustra presents these powerful, poetic visions, and the later works offer a more rigorous, philosophical unpacking of them.
That's one way to look at it. The shift in style might also reflect a change in audience or purpose, moving from this book for all and none, which seems aimed at a broader, maybe more transformative impact,
to a more direct engagement with the philosophical establishment.
perhaps trying to reshape philosophical discourse more directly. You could say Zarathustra proposes the solution to the vision, and the later works analyze the problems in more detail.
Heinrich Meyer's idea is interesting, too, that the tension in Zarathustra between philosopher and prophet actually helped Nietzsche find the independent voice for later works like Ecce Homo or the Antichrist.
Right. It suggests Zarathustra's unique form was a necessary, maybe transitional phase for him, a kind of creative crucible, as the source puts it, a unique moment.
It's fascinating, then, to consider the journey this book has taken since publication. Its reception history sounds incredibly varied, contradictory even.
Oh, it's truly complex. The report details that. Initially, when it was published in part 4 only privately at first,
Right.
the critical reception was very mixed. Some recognized its originality, its power, but many others just dismissed it as obscure, eccentric, maybe even mad. It didn't really get widespread attention during Nietzsche's active years. It gained traction after his mental collapse.
And isn't it deeply ironic that this book, which is so much about individual strength and overcoming, ended up being widely distributed to German soldiers in World War I?
Massively ironic.
Yeah.
And tragically twisted for nationalistic purposes, completely misrepresenting its core message. A stark example of appropriation.
But what's also remarkable, according to the source, is the early interest it got from completely different quarters, like left-wing and anarchist circles.
Yeah, figures like Gustav Landauer, Emma Goldman, Benjamin Tucker. They were drawn to its powerful critique of bourgeois morality, the state, established institutions, even though Nietzsche himself was pretty critical of socialism and anarchism.
It just shows how ambiguous the text can be, appealing across these huge divides.
Exactly. Its unique style facilitated wildly different interpretations right from the start. Is it nihilistic or overcoming nihilism? What's a will to power? And then, of course, you had the deeply problematic association with anti-Semitism and nationalism, heavily fueled by his sister, Elizabeth Förster Nietzsche. That casts a long, dark shadow.
Absolutely. But then, moving into the 20th century, Zarathustra becomes foundational for major philosophical movements. Existentialism, for one.
That connection seems almost inevitable, doesn't it? Nietzsche, alongside Kierkegaard, is seen as a crucial forerunner.
The themes just line up. The death of God, nihilism, the burden of freedom and responsibility, self-creation, the critique of the herd, philosophy as a lived commitment.
Exactly. Thinkers like Sartre, Camus, and de Beauvoir, they grappled directly with the questions Nietzsche raised about finding meaning and creating values in a world without those traditional anchors. Sartre's existence precedes essence echoes Nietzschean self-creation. Camus explored confronting absurdity. De Beauvoir applied these ideas to the condition of women. Zarathustra's challenge resonated deeply.
And then postmodernism, Nietzsche as the grandfather of postmodern thought.
That's how he's often framed. His critique of objective truth, his perspectivism, the idea that knowledge is always situated, always from a viewpoint.
His genealogical method, digging into the history of values.
Right. And the death of God, of course, all incredibly influential for key postmodern thinkers. Foucault drew heavily on the genealogical method. Derrida used Nietzschean strategies for deconstruction. Deleuze emphasized the affirmative side will to power, eternal recurrence as affirming becoming. Lyotard's incredulity toward meta-narratives owes a debt too.
There's even a phenomenon called postmodern left Nietzscheanism.
Yes, showing that complex political legacy again.
Beyond philosophy, the impact on literature seems immense, maybe its most significant early influence.
Arguably, yes. The list is impressive. Thomas Mann, Hermann Hesse, Rainer Maria Rilke, W.B. Yeats, Gide, Shaw, Strindberg, Kazantzakis, even Eugene O'Neill.
O'Neill said Zarathustra was his biggest influence. Wow.
He did. Writers were captivated by its poetic language, its drama, its exploration of self-discovery, the instinct, reason, tension, overcoming conditioning. They wove these themes into their own work.
And Nietzsche's psychological insights, too. He's seen as a profound psychologist.
Absolutely. His ideas permeated depth psychology. Freud, for instance.
Denied it, but the parallels are there.
Undeniable parallels. Unconscious drives, repression, sublimation, sexuality. Though they differed significantly on morality, both saw conscious awareness as just the surface.
And Carl Jung was openly fascinated.
Oh, completely. He gave a lengthy seminar just on Zarathustra. He interpreted its symbols as archetypes, the wise old man, the divine child, representing psychological integration, the process of individuation, though he also critiqued Zarathustra's forceful, almost overwhelming style sometimes.
Alfred Adler, too, his striving for superiority.
Yes, Adler's individual psychology, with its emphasis on striving for superiority, understood as self-realization, definitely echoes the will to power and self-creation.
And even humanistic psychology, Maslow.
There are clear links. Maslow's concepts of self-actualization and peak experiences have parallels with the Übermensch ideal and moments of Dionysian ecstasy. The broader emphasis in humanistic psychology on self-esteem, authenticity, growth. Much of that owes a debt to Nietzschean ideas, often via Adler.
But the political appropriations, that remains the most disturbing part of the legacy.
It really is the most contentious aspect. The way the Nazis distorted ideas like the Übermensch and will to power, aided by his sister, it's horrific.
Even though the text itself has critiques of democracy, equality, socialism, and praises hierarchy sometimes.
Yes, those passages exist, and they are challenging. But it's crucial to contrast the fascist appropriation with the early embrace by anarchists and leftists who focused on its critique of existing power structures.
Yeah.
It just highlights the ambiguity.
And the debate continues, right, about whether there are genuinely proto-fascist elements.
Absolutely. Some critics, like Bertrand Russell back in the day, saw danger in its focus on the individual over the community. Others emphasized the style ironic, hyperbolic, intended as philosophical provocation, not political manifesto.
It's interesting that some contemporary analyses suggest liberal democracy might actually be the best system for fostering Übermenschen by protecting individualism.
It's a fascinating twist, isn't it? The reception is just this incredibly complex story, admiration, misunderstanding, appropriation, critique, shaping literature psychology with a political legacy that's still hotly debated.
So the engagement didn't stop there. Later, major thinkers continued to grapple with Zarathustra.
Not at all. It remained a key text. The report details how figures like Martin Heidegger, for instance,
He saw Nietzsche as the final metaphysician, right? Culminating in the will to power.
yes, he interpreted Nietzsche through the lens of his own history of being, focusing heavily on will to power and eternal recurrence as metaphysical concepts.
And the French post-structuralists, we mentioned Foucault, Derrida, Deleuze, the influence was immense there.
Huge. Foucault adopted the genealogical method, tracing power knowledge. Derrida drew on the critique of truth and metaphysics for deconstruction. Deleuze really emphasized the affirmative vitalist aspects he found in Zarathustra will to power, eternal recurrence as the affirmation of becoming.
But they were all selective, weren't they, prioritizing certain themes for their own projects?
Inevitably, yes. That's often how philosophical influence works. The existentialists, too, Sartre, Camus, Beauvoir, engaged deeply with the death of God and its implications for freedom, responsibility, finding meaning in absurdity.
Sartre adapting self-creation, Camus exploring absurdity, Beauvoir applying it to women's condition, focusing on that existential predicament Nietzsche highlighted.
Right. And others too, like Georges Bataille looking at transgression and sovereignty, or Jung's ongoing psychological interpretation.
But this engagement also involved critique and highlighted ongoing debates.
Definitely. The meaning of the core concepts is still debated. Is the Übermensch a literal goal or an unreachable ideal? Is will to power metaphysical or psychological? Is eternal recurrence cosmological or ethical?
And that tension, philosophy versus literature, is it primarily a poem or a philosophical treatise? Critiques often arise from applying the standards of one genre to the other.
That's a persistent issue. And the political implications, of course, remain a source of criticism in the perceived elitism, anti-democratic sentiments, even beyond the fascist misreadings. Questions about internal consistency within Zarathustra and across Nietzsche's work are also raised.
And the style itself, some find it obscure, affected, mystical, hindering clear communication.
True. But countering these critiques are interpretations emphasizing its positive project, overcoming nihilism, promoting self-creation, affirming life, modeling philosophy as a way of life. The legacy is really defined by this constant back and forth, appropriation, critique, affirmation, reevaluation.
Which brings us to contemporary Nietzsche studies. It sounds like there's still a really vibrant scholarly interest in Zarathustra, despite maybe periods where it was marginalized.
Absolutely vibrant. The report highlights how current scholarship is moving beyond some older, maybe simpler dichotomies.
Like philosophy versus literature.
Exactly. Now there's more emphasis on the inextricable link between form and content, analyzing the philosophical significance of the literary structure.
And reassessing its coherence, challenging dismissals based on surface inconsistencies, even if Nietzsche critiqued systems.
Right. Looking for deeper structures or developmental logic. And the status of Part 4 is still a hot topic.
Is it integral? Is it a satyr play after the tragedy? How does it relate to the first three parts, parody, the role of laughter, the higher men?
All actively debated. And the figure of Zarathustra himself, philosopher or prophet. That interpretation by Meyer Seeing the tension between these roles as structuring the work has been really influential.
There's also a trend towards looking at its religious or spiritual dimensions, not just as anti-religious.
Yes, seeing it almost as offering its own kind of post-metaphysical spirituality or piety,
Yeah.
a focus on life, overcoming laughter as a form of holiness, maybe even a value architecture or salvation technology for a godless age.
And ethical and political reevaluations, too, moving beyond simple individualism.
Trying to. Examining the role of the other, community, seeking anti-fascist political readings, exploring potential compatibility with ideas like agonistic democracy.
Alongside continued close readings of the core concepts, Übermensch, will to power, eternal recurrence, specifically within Zarathustra's unique context.
Exactly. Contemporary engagement really seems to appreciate Zarathustra's intricate design and philosophical depth on its own terms, focusing on internal coherence, how the narrative embodies the ideas, its unique structural properties.
So, why does Zarathustra still matter so much today? What's its enduring significance?
Well, firstly, it's clearly central to Nietzsche's own thought. It's the vessel for some of his most crucial ideas, his proposed solutions to nihilism and resentment, the most elaborate presentation of the Übermensch and eternal recurrence, key parts of his affirmative project.
And beyond Nietzsche's scholarship.
Its power endures because it engages with themes that are still incredibly central to our modern, maybe postmodern condition. The collapse of traditional meaning, the challenge of nihilism, the burden and possibility of value creation, questions of selfhood, authenticity.
Things we're still grappling with.
Absolutely. And its challenging style, its ambiguities, they actually provoke new readings. They prevent it from becoming this static historical artifact. The persistent debate, the difficulty, in a way it fulfills its purpose as a book for all and none.
Resisting definitive interpretation, demanding ongoing engagement.
Precisely. And that's what ensures its continuing vitality and relevance. It keeps making us think.
Well, this deep dive has certainly, I hope, offered a valuable shortcut to understanding the core of Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and its really profound and often complicated impact. We've touched on the key concepts, Übermensch, will to power, eternal recurrence, all within that crucial context of the death of Dad.
And the unique literary form he used, and that turbulent reception history.
Yeah, quite a journey.
Indeed. And maybe it leaves us and our listeners with a final provocative thought to chew on.
Go for it.
Considering Nietzsche's really powerful ideas about self-overcoming, about creating one's own values, how might these ideas resonate with the challenges, the opportunities we face in our own time, especially maybe in the absence of those traditional, universally accepted frameworks of meaning?
What new forms of meaning, what new affirmations might it be possible for us to create, to embrace?
Exactly. What can we build?
Powerful food for thought. We definitely encourage everyone listening to delve deeper into the source material, maybe even tackle Nietzsche's work firsthand. Form your own interpretations of this endlessly fascinating, endlessly challenging text.
It rewards the effort.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.